Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Fight Season MMA, and today for my video, I want to talk about who is the hardest fight matchup for each UFC champion currently. I want to go in and break down some of the hardest matchups for each champion, flyweight to heavyweight, and see how and why they are going to be the hardest for their respective champion. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe. 99% of viewers who watch the videos aren't subscribed, so it means a lot if you go down there and show support by subscribing and liking the video. Also, if you want to comment, I try to respond to as many comments as possible. And let's get right into the video right now. Okay, first off, I want to start in the UFC flyweight division, and I think the hardest matchup for Alexandre Pantoja is going to be Manel Kape. There isn't really that much depth in the UFC flyweight division, and that's why I want to go down the rankings a little bit to select Manel Kape. Manel Kape is one of the hardest, most fun fighters in the flyweight division. He's got a great chin, great striking, he's got some jiu-jitsu on the ground, but he's a great kickboxer in the UFC, and I think that his ability to stop the takedown and ultimately piece up Pantoja on the feet is going to be something that gets him the win. You look at the fight against Steve Erceg for Alexander Pantoja, and he ultimately lost that fight in my opinion. Ultimately, though, he did get the win versus Pantoja at UFC 301. But Manel Kape is a fighter that is going to be on everyone's radar. He's fighting at UFC 304 versus Muhammad Mokaev, and I think he gets the win there. And I think that Manel Kape is someone who to watch for the rankings going up because he is one of the best up-and-coming fighters in the UFC right now, and I think that he would be an incredibly hard fight for Alexandre Pantoja. Okay, next I want to go to the UFC bantamweight division and Sean O'Malley, and I easily think the hardest fight for Sean O'Malley in that division is going to be Corey Sandhagen. Corey Sandhagen is fighting Umar Nurmagomedov on August 3rd here out in Fight Island in Abu Dhabi, and I think he ultimately gets the win over Umar, which is going to be an incredibly impressive win, and I think he's going to jump into a title fight against Sean O'Malley if he beats Merab Dvalishvili. But I think that Corey Sandhagen is easily the hardest fight for Sean O'Malley, considering how well he mixes up all of his techniques, how he can integrate his wrestling, his striking all into one, and of how he is genuinely has some of the highest IQ in the UFC currently. And I think that's going to give Sean O'Malley such a hard task. I think Sean O'Malley is going to do good against most of the wrestlers in the UFC bantamweight division, just because he understands that they are going to be shooting at him, and that's the main way that they're going to be able to beat him. But Corey Sandhagen is going to be able to beat Sean O'Malley on the feet, and he's going to be able to beat him on the ground. And that's something that Sean O'Malley is going to, I think, have a really hard time with, because you look at that Chito Vera fight that Corey Sandhagen had, and he was piecing Chito Vera up on the feet, and it was because, and Chito Vera had such a hard time because he genuinely had no idea what was coming at him from Corey Sandhagen. Ultimately, I think Corey Sandhagen does beat Sean O'Malley in a fight, and I do think that something like this happening. I think Corey Sandhagen is easily the hardest fight for Sean O'Malley in the UFC bantamweight division. For the UFC featherweight division, I have Ilia Toporia's hardest matchup being Max Holloway, and this comes to a surprise to probably no one, but I think Max Holloway's chin is going to be something that gives Ilia Topuria a massive issue. If you look at all the opponents Max Holloway's fought, and he has not been knocked down once, and that's not counting the knockdown versus Justin Gaethje, who hits like an absolute truck, and they didn't count that, but Ilia Toporia's main style isn't on volume, rather it's on quality, and someone who is going to be able to eat the bigger shots in Max Holloway, I think is going to really affect Ilia Topuria. But I do think Ilia Topuria can win this fight because of how well-rounded he is. You look at Max Holloway, and yes, he has takedowns in the UFC, and he has such a big IQ. You look at the Yair Rodriguez fight for Max Holloway, and he did throw in some takedowns because that fight was getting super dangerous for him on the feet. But Ilia Topuria is easily a better jiu-jitsu artist than Max Holloway, and he's a more powerful hitter than Max Holloway in the 145-pound division. Ilia Toporia's hardest fight easily is Max Holloway. I think he still gets the job done, but this is a coin flip for me, possibly maybe 52% Ilia, 48% Max Holloway, but ultimately this is 100% the hardest fight in the division for Ilia Topuria. In the UFC lightweight division for Islam Makhachev, the hardest fighter for him to face is Arman Tsarukyan, and this is not a surprise, I don't think, to anyone, but Arman Tsarukyan is so good, and I think his wrestling ability is going to be able to nullify Islam Makhachev's wrestling, which puts it into a striking match, and yes, that striking match very much favors Islam, but, and I look at every single person in the UFC lightweight division, I could not pick someone to really be a challenge to Islam Makhachev because he is that good. Islam is just, has every single facet that you want. He might be the best wrestler in the UFC, and he just outstruck Dustin Poirier, possibly Volkanovski, both fights. And he has submission wins, and he's a great submission artist. He has a submission over Dustin Poirier by Darce, Dan Hooker by Kimura, and Bobby Green by rear naked choke. ultimately, these are just some of the craziest accolades I've seen in the UFC, and I don't think there is a hard fight in the UFC for Islam, but that hard fight is Arman Tsarukyan, in my opinion, someone who can nullify the wrestling and has a chance on the feet. Ultimately, I still have Islam winning this fight pretty easily, but Arman Tsarukyan is easily the toughest challenger for Islam in the UFC lightweight division. In the UFC welterweight division, the hardest matchup for Leon Edwards, in my opinion, is easily, no doubt in my mind, Shavkat Rakhmonov. Shavkat Rakhmonov is currently the number 3 ranked UFC welterweight, and if you don't know who Shavkat Rakhmonov is, you got to go see this absolute bad human being fight. His finish against Jeff Neal was absolutely crazy. His fight with Wonderboy, where he had no ankles apparently, and he had a torn ligament in his ankle, submitting him in the second round. Shavkat Rakhmonov is 18-0, has 18 finishes in 18 fights. He is absolutely insane, and I think his ability to go on the ground and to be able to strike with Leon Edwards is going to be something absolutely crazy. Yes, Leon Edwards is going to have the striking advantage over Shavkat Rakhmonov because Leon Edwards is one of, if not the best strikers in the UFC currently, but Shavkat is easily going to have the ground advantage, and I think that difference between the striking between the two isn't as great as a lot of people think. I think Shavkat is easily one of the best up-and-coming prospects. If you put Shavkat versus Ian Gary is getting absolutely blitzed through by Shavkat. I do have Shavkat Rakhmonov beating Leon Edwards when this fight eventually happens. I do think Leon gets through Bilal, and I think his next fight is going to be either against Shavkat Rakhmonov or a title winner against Shavkat Rakhmonov and Jack Della Maddalena. But Shavkat Rakhmonov is easily the hardest fighter for Leon Edwards in the UFC welterweight division. In the UFC middleweight division, I have the hardest fight for Dricus du Plessis being with Israel Adesanya, and that happens to be DDP's next opponent in UFC 305 in August. And I do think that a fight with Israel Adesanya is going to be so hard for DDP just because of Israel Adesanya's counter-striking ability. You look at Sean Strickland versus Israel Adesanya, and Sean Strickland did so well because he kind of always stayed out of the range of someone like Israel, and he had that very defensive style, that Philly shell, where DDP was able to exploit that because of his wrestling ability. Even though Sean Strickland there wasn't really any control time in that fight, he was still able to get up, but it looked like there was a lot of takedowns being thrown, and DDP was getting the control, and he was able to mix up everything fluently. Israel Adesanya, on the other hand, is such a good counter striker, and you look at his fights with Robert Whittaker and Alex Pereira, that both of those knockouts came off counter striking, and that is something that I think Israel Adesanya is going to have a massive advantage of over Dricus du Plessis. These two fighters are going to have such an amazing fight at UFC 305, and I do think Dricus du Plessis gets the win. But that is a very iffy statement right there. I am not sure at all. I can 100% see Israel Adesanya clipping Dricus du Plessis in the first or second round when Dricus is going to shoot for a takedown. Ultimately, no doubt in my mind in the UFC middleweight division that Israel Adesanya is the hardest fighter for Dricus du Plessis to face. And the hardest fighter for Alex Pereira to face in the UFC light heavyweight division I have is Jan Blachowicz, which is crazy because Alex Pereira already beat him. And the reason I do not have Magomed Ankalaev in this statement is if Magomed Ankalaev is truly serious about striking with Alex Pereira, it's going to be one of the easiest fights that Alex Pereira has had in the UFC. I think if Magomed gets hit once by Alex Pereira, he's going to get absolutely sent to the moon. And Jan Blachowicz is, one, he has an amazing chin, and two, he's a bigger, smarter guy than someone like Magomed Ankalaev if he does want to sit there and strike with Alex Pereira. You look at the leg kicks from Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev in their fight, and Magomed's legs were gone out under him by Jan Blachowicz in 2 rounds, and I see Alex Pereira doing the exact same thing, only worse to Magomed Ankalaev, where in the fight between Jan Blachowicz and Alex Pereira, that was a super close fight for and win for Alex Pereira, and a very controversial decision for a lot of people. Jan Blachowicz in a 5-round fight, I do think would still lose to Alex Pereira, and that's how it was going in that last fight. Jan won the first round. The second round was super close, but I think Alex Pereira won, and Jan Blachowicz lost the third round. But Jan's IQ and strategy and takedown ability is going to be super good against Alex Pereira in a rematch if that possibly happens. And Magomed Ankalaev's IQ, if he just wants to stand up and strike with him, is going to be very bad because he's going to get knocked out instantly. But if Magomed chooses to wrestle, I think that this fight is incredibly different, but I don't know if that's going to be truly the case. And lastly, for each of the UFC heavyweights, the John Jones and Tom Aspinall, I have their hardest fight being each other. You look at Tom Aspinall, the UFC interim champion, and John Jones beating Cyril Gane to become the UFC heavyweight champion, and 100% no doubt in my mind, the hardest fight for both fighters is one another. Tom Aspinall is so fast, so big, and so strong. Going up against someone like Jon Jones, he's going to have the size advantage, which is something crazy because Jon Jones has never fought someone who is bigger than him. Even when he moved up a weight class to fight Ciryl Gane, it was pretty obvious that Jon Jones was the bigger, stronger fighter. And the other thing that's going to benefit Jon Jones is how well-rounded he is, because Jon Jones has an amazing jiu-jitsu game, he has an amazing wrestling game, and he has the skills to be able to defeat Jon Jones in every single category. But Jon Jones, you got to look at his fighting IQ, his fighting experience, and ultimately this would be such a coin toss of a fight. I think I do have Tom Aspinall beating Jon Jones because of his the newer age, but I do think a prime Jon Jones at heavyweight does beat Tom Aspinall. But like I said, this is an absolute coin flip of a fight. This fight I don't think is ever going to happen, but if it does, we can definitely get more in depth to it. But I do think a fight between Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall would easily be the hardest fight for each fighter. Thank you guys so much for watching this video of every UFC champion's hardest matchup in their respective division. Please let me know what you think about these fighters and these matchups, and if they are truly, do you think the hardest, and if you do think that there's someone else, please leave a comment down below, and I will do my best to respond to as many as possible. If you enjoyed the videos, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will come with you guys very, very soon with more UFC content and news.